Hi everybody, and thank you Ellie for inviting me to come and speak to you all today. I'm really sorry that I can't be there live, but hopefully this pre-record has worked, fingers crossed. I'm Charlie Bell. I work for the National Trust on a landscape scale nature recovery project in South Shropshire. So I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to the project, and then I'm going to hand over to Sue Rees-Evans, who's the Shropshire County Dragonfly Recorder, and she's going to tell you a bit about the dragonfly specific work that we're collaborating on at the moment. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Fingers crossed. Bear with me. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So Stepping Stones, as I've said, is a landscape scale nature conservation project. It's currently led by the National Trust, but it involves a whole bunch of different organisations, people, landowners and community groups. So very much a collaboration. And as a project, we have a 50-year vision. And you can see here that there's two parts to that vision. So the first is focused on the ecology, really. So the vision is that the natural habitats in the Shropshire Hills are restored, healthy and connected. And then the second part of that vision is all about the people. So it's thinking about the people who live here, who work here, who might visit the area, and wanting them to understand, appreciate and support our efforts. And just to give you a bit of an idea of where we are, you can see here a zoomed out bit of the sort of middle bit of the British Isles. You can see that the project area is outlined in black here. So we're just on the English side of the sort of mid-Wales border, really. And you can also see marked on the map areas of upland heath. If we zoom in a little bit further, you can start to orient yourself with various towns and cities. So you can see Birmingham off to the east, and Shrewsbury is just to the north of the project area, and then Hereford a little bit further south. And we do actually, as I said, come right up to the Welsh border on the western side of the project area here. So within the project area, we actually have the largest concentration of priority habitats in the West Midlands. So a really, really important area for a lot of different habitats. Because of where we're situated, we have a mix of southern and northern vegetation types. We also have a range of sort of lowland and upland area within the project area, from the valley floors right up to some upland heath habitat. So because of both those things, we're really at the front line of climate change. You know, we can see that in action as species distribution is shifting both in a northerly direction and in an increased elevation direction as well. So things are generally moving to the north and moving uphill. We're quite a key site in terms of upland heath. We're the only site of upland in England between that concentration of heathland down in the southwest, Exmoor, Dartmoor, and then the heathland that starts to come in on the Pennines up here, so the Staffordshire Moors and the Peak District. We also have a nationally significant concentration of wet flushes and spring-fed wetlands. So obviously, if we're thinking about dragonflies, you know, we are a really important area in terms of those habitats and the dragonfly species that they support. So if we zoom in a little bit more on the project area, here we are. We cover just over 200 square kilometres of the Shropshire Hills. We're mostly within the Shropshire Hills National Landscape. It used to be called the AONB, but now the Shropshire Hills National Landscape. And you can see that within the project area, we have two key sites for nature conservation. This pinky area here is the Long Mynd. Some of you may have visited that. We're a triple SI, predominantly owned and managed by the National Trust in partnership with a group of commoners who have grazing rights to the hill. And several miles across the valley here, we've got the Stiper Stones Ridge, a national nature reserve managed by Natural England, and quite a few additional triple SIs as well, owned and managed by a combination of Natural England and the Shropshire Wildlife Trust. And the project really came about because there was a growing realisation over several decades really that despite having these two core sites for nature in the Longmynd and the Stiperstones and lots of effort going into nature conservation within those areas, we were still losing species and we were still seeing habitat loss and habitat degradation. And really the conclusion was that that was because of what was happening in the surrounding landscape, and that, you know, just having this landscape of sort of little nature reserves dotted around, it wasn't really fit for purpose anymore. The existing nature reserve network was inadequate to conserve the things that we wanted to conserve, really. And the driver for this, essentially, was landscape change for a variety of different reasons. Changing agricultural practice is obviously a big one. Much of the project area is rural, so those changing agricultural practices have had a big impact on the landscape. So, for example, this picture here in the bottom right, an example of a very heavily sheep grazed upland. We see a lot of this in the project area, big sheep walks with very little of interest in terms of nature conservation, very, very tightly grazed. You can see the impact this has on this picture on the top right here. So this is an aerial view of part of the top of the Longmynd. Excuse me. You can see on the left side of this fence line here, we've got some heather. We've got the heather cap still there on the hill, and that lovely purple colour, lots of heathland dwarf shrubs and things underneath there. But on the right-hand side, we've got an overgrazed upland, essentially. So this is out of National Trust ownership. We can see lots of sheep there, and as a result, we've lost that heathland habitat. So just one example of the sort of change that we've seen in the area over the past decades and centuries, really. And as I'm sure many of you are aware that this leads to obviously loss of habitat, but also really importantly, loss of connectivity. So we're losing those landscape features that join everything up and link everything together. And this is a quote taken from the most recent Shropshire Flora in 2015, and it summarises things quite well. It talks about the increasing polarisation between the conservation-rich areas and the conservation-poor areas. And that leads to an overall weakening of the ecological network and, of course, loss of species from the area. And just to illustrate this, really, I've got a map here of the existing wetland network within the Stepping Stones project area. You can see it's quite fragmented there. We do have, as I said, nationally important areas of these habitats, but they are very broken up, very fragmented. We don't really have that, that functional network in terms of our wetland habitats. And the sort of wetland habitats I'm talking about are quite sizable rivers draining the catchment. So on the valley floors, we've got quite sizable rivers like this. This is the Upper Onny River. We've also got some lovely upland pools. This is a pool called Wildmoor Pool on top of the Longmynd. It's probably the best dragonfly site, certainly in the area, if not in the county. Plenty of fast-flowing upland rivers and streams as well. Quite flashy, so very responsive to rainfall. Quite steep, very rocky, and fantastic habitat for species like golden ringed dragonfly. I'm lucky enough to be able to see that on my way in and out of work. I work in a National Trust property called Cardingmill Valley, and one of the valleys of the Longmynd. So yeah, it's a bit of a treat to wander outside at lunchtime and see golden ringed dragonfly zooming up and down. We've got some post-industrial landscapes as well, mostly associated with mining. So we do have some man-made pools as well, mostly in the west of the project area around the Stiperstones Ridge. So pools such as this one here. And as I've mentioned, wet flushes and sort of fen habitat. You can see a nice wet flush coming down the middle of this picture here, despite the quite heavy grazing on either side. So what do we do about this fragmentation, this loss of connectivity? Well, many of you will be familiar with this chap here. This is Professor Sir John Lawton, and in 2010 he published a paper called Making Space for Nature, and he came up with this phrase which has really become a mantra for conservation over the last decade: more, bigger, better, and joined. And what he's talking about is having more nature reserves, more space for nature within our landscape. buffering existing areas so that they function as bigger nature reserves, losing that really hard divide between the edge of a nature reserve and the rest of the landscape. He's thinking about how we manage our existing nature reserves and, you know, wondering if we could do that better. But really importantly, it's that final word there, joining everything up. So moving away from this situation where we have isolated pockets of nature in a wider landscape to a landscape that's much more connected up, much more joined. And what this might look like for the Stepping Stones project area is this. Obviously, this is just a sort of infographic to illustrate it, but you can imagine that here we've got the Long Mynd, and across the valley, the Stiper Stones. Around, we've got this buffer zone. So thinking about the land use immediately outside those fences, essentially, trying to stop that hard divide between inside and outside. Then in the wider landscape, we've got these little patches of habitat. So not huge nature reserves, but just little patches here and there. It could be as small as a field corner, or it could be a small triple SI or something like that. But these are the stepping stones within the landscape, these little patches of habitat that will allow species to hop between them. And this is how the project gets its name, the Stepping Stones Project. And then also helping to link everything up, we've got these long linear features, these landscape corridors or wildlife corridors, the superhighway network for our species, if you will, things like hedgerows, road verges, streamside wetlands, ditches. And what this might actually look like in practice within the project area is shown here. So this is a typical view of the Stepping Stones landscape. It's not a specific place, but it's a sort of general view. And you can see on the right-hand side of the road, we've got a landscape that's pretty well connected for nature. It's pretty good in terms of habitat, but also there's habitat linkages. Whereas on the left-hand side, we have a less connected landscape. So a landscape where we've lost a lot of those connecting features, like our hedgerows, where various different habitats are maybe not being managed as well as they could be. Obviously, this is a very hard divide between the right and the left side of the road. In reality, it's a spectrum, but we're always hoping to move towards the right-hand side of that image, away from the left-hand side. And something important to still say is the image on the right-hand side, it's still a farmed landscape. We still have farming going on, we still have agriculture, but it's also functioning to provide all those ecosystem services and value for nature as well. Okay, but we can't do it alone as the National Trust or as individuals, of course. So we have to work together. And with Stepping Stones, we're taking 3 different approaches. The first is working with a group of about 20 local farmers. We are in an agricultural landscape, so farmers have a huge role to play in terms of how the landscape is managed. And we've got a great group of local farmers who are, becoming increasingly active in terms of nature conservation. It's a farmer-led group, but we support them and sort of facilitate them to do things like farm visits and farm demonstrations. For example, they've recently been up to visit James Rebanks, who some of you may have heard of, in the Lake District, to see how he's farming, both for sort of food production, but also for nature. We also have a strand of the project focused on local community groups and volunteers. We're so lucky in the area that we've got about 12 or 15 groups who are all focused on some aspect of nature or the environment. So that can range from the local meadows group to the Shropshire Dormouse group, to 4 local community wildlife groups involved in things like nest box schemes and a lot of biological recording as well. So yeah, really lucky. We also run a volunteer group, so we can go out around the project area doing things like hedge planting and meadow management or whatever might be needed. We've also got a strand of the project that focuses directly on work for certain species and certain habitats. And that could be on National Trust land, or it could be on our partner land, or land owned by farmers or smallholders as well. So I'm going to focus really on that last aspect, that nature conservation work, and tell you a little bit about our species action plans. So over the past 12 months, we've produced 12 species action plans in partnership with Natural England. And you can see here on the left of the screen, the species that have now got action plans for the project area. a range of different species. We've got several bird species in there, snipe, tree pipit, for example. We've got several invertebrates. Small pearl-bordered fritillary is a really key butterfly species for the project area. Bilberry bumblebee as well, a nationally rare bee that we still have quite good populations of. And of course, upland dragonflies. You'll see I've highlighted that one there. And several plant species as well, so mountain pansy, cowberry and devil's bit scabious. We've also got a couple of the cute fluffy things as well. I'm sure everyone on this call will appreciate plants and invertebrates and, you know, the sort of less sexy species, but in terms of, you know, getting engagement from the wider public and the media, it often tends to be the cute fluffy things that still count. So we've got otter and dormouse in there as well. So the species action plans look a little bit like this. This is the front page of the one for upland dragonflies. And although they've been produced by local ecologists working for Stepping Stones and working for Natural England, they have been written in consultation with various experts, so local people with specific knowledge about those species in the local area. So they haven't been done in isolation. It's been a collaborative effort. And one thing that we're really keen on is that these documents are living documents. So we're intending that they're updated, amended, improved in any way that they can be. So I think we all acknowledge, you know, they're probably not perfect, but they are a start. So it's a great place to start from. Something that I keep getting asked is why we pick those 12 species. Well, you know, we could have done 50. I'm sure we could probably have thought of 100, but we had to pick 12. And, you know, I'm sure everybody will have their own lists of species that they thought should be included. But one of the main reasons for picking this group of 12 was that between them, they represent a wide range of habitat types within the project area. And we hope that together they'll drive action which will create or link these habitats together. So just thinking a little bit about the aims of these species action plans, you know, why did we bother producing them? So partly it's to raise awareness and create momentum around species conservation locally. And this is already working. We had a conference a couple of weeks ago where we launched these 12 action plans, and that was attended by 120 people. We were at capacity, and we had a long waiting list as well. So, you know, there's a lot of passion there. There's a lot of interest in focusing on certain species. It really seems to capture people's imagination. It's also a great opportunity to gather together some key information on these species within the project area to act as a baseline, I suppose. So, for example, we did quite a lot of distribution modelling for each species, and each action plan has a map of species distribution within the project area. They also contain actions, obviously, and activities that could potentially shape future projects or be lifted straight off the action plans into a funding bid application. This is really important for someone in a role like mine, where we're always looking for the future funding of the project. You know, we're trying to find money to do some of this stuff, and it's really helpful to have these ready-made action plans. And actually, we've already done this. So last year we lifted some of the actions for 4 different species into a funding bid for some money from Natural England called the Species Recovery Grant. We were successful in that, so we're already underway delivering some of the actions for 4 of those species. Not upland dragonflies at the moment, I'm afraid, but you know, hopefully in the future we can take some of those dragonfly actions and find some funding to start delivering them. They also provide a focus for volunteer activity. You know, we've got lots of people in the local area quite keen to get involved with things, so the species action plans are a handy way of bringing together all those volunteer opportunities. So each species action plan has a species champion. And the idea with these species champions is that they're an individual, or in some cases an organisation, who can really drive the adoption of these action plans and keep the profile of that species high. The species champions aren't necessarily going to be the person who is delivering all of those actions, but it's someone who has an overview of everything that's going on related to that species locally. They're able to highlight any gaps and really advocate for those species to be a focus of different organisations, projects and activities. A key role for them is also identifying locations and possibly landowners who could really influence positive land management for these species within the project area. And you can see that there we've got an arrow showing that Sue is the species champion for dragonflies within the Stepping Stones project area. So she'll be talking to you in just a minute. Okay, so let me stop sharing that. So hopefully that's given you an overview of the Stepping Stones project, and I'll hand over to Sue to talk more specifically about dragonflies in the area. Just one final thing to say is that if you're interested in finding out more about the project or joining our mailing list or even volunteering if you're local, if you just search online for National Trust Stepping Stones Project Shropshire or words to that effect, then you'll find us. You can join our mailing list or you can get in touch with me via that route. So yeah, thanks again for listening, and I'll hand over to Sue.
Yeah, so afternoon, everyone. I'm Sue Rees-Evans, as many of you know, and I'm the Shropshire County Dragonfly Recorder. And as Charlie explained, I've been asked to be the species champion for upland dragonflies for the Stepping Stones project. And I was really pleased to take this on. It was actually only a couple of years ago that I was doing some dragonfly teaching at the Natural England offices on the Stepping Stones in the project area. And I was running a session called What Next, where I was sort of trying to direct all this newfound identification skill into something productive, really, and proactive. And I was really lucky because the State of Dragonflies report had only literally just come out, the 2021 report. And of course, it was highlighting some declines in our upland species. And so I shone quite a hefty light on this, and I like to think that some of the noise I was making actually led to the project choosing to put one of their species action plans to upland dragonflies. And I'm not just saying that to pat myself on the back, but I'm saying it really because I just wanted to say to all the people who wrote the report and who were involved in writing that report that it really makes a difference to noisemakers like myself when we're out and about doing teaching, talking, walking, and all these things, because it gives us some great real evidence that we can then take to groups and all interested parties and really, try and steer or show them really useful things that can be done. So it's really nice to see sort of all those different parts, if you like, coming together. So anyway, I've only got about 8-10 minutes, and I've probably already used up 5. So I've got next to no time from this lovely photo from Andrew Fusek-Peters of a black darter, which I think you'll all recognise from being in a BDS magazine previously. In my short time, I want to sort of give a very brief overview of what the problems might be with some of our upland species, why we're seeing declines. I then obviously want to give an overview of the action plan that's been written, what it's hoping to achieve in the short term and the long term. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about some ways in which people can help. And obviously I'm aware there's a lot of people on this call who aren't from anywhere near the project area. But this bit is relatively brief, as this all is. And I'm hoping at least this will perhaps feed into ideas of things that can be done at your local levels, if you're not Shropshire, and ideas of how you can get all sorts of people involved, regardless of their identification experience. So that's the plan. So we all know this report, this great report came out in 2021, and this is a fairly well-known graphic from it. And of course it showed that many of our species, well over 40%, were really doing seemingly quite well, expanding their occupancy in Britain and Ireland. But of course it's the ones on the right-hand end of the graphic in the pinky red zone, the wrong side of the line, that I'm focusing on. And when you read through those names, there's a good number of our upland species in there. And of course, emerald damselfly is famously the one declining the most. And we know it's not exclusively an upland species, but certainly with various studies I've done on pools up on our upland plateau areas, particularly the Long Bind, all the pools that were really good for black darter were actually, full of emerald damselfly too. So it's certainly thriving in upland areas too, as much as anywhere else. And things that are having a negative effect on upland habitats are obviously going to be affecting and contributing to emerald damselfly's decline. So, broadly speaking, as I say, in the time I've got, why are we seeing declines in our upland species? Well, it could be as simple as pools drying out. A good few of the species favouring really shallow pools for their rapid larval development, but these pools may simply be drying out too early in the season for larval development to have completed. Certainly, when you think back to the May we had in 2023 in its torridness. Also, competition from other species. We saw all those species, the vast majority of species that were expanding their occupancy. And as Charlie said in her talk, things aren't only moving sort of north and west, they're also moving uphill, as it were, up to higher altitude because of perhaps warmer, more benign conditions. And if this happens, of course, we're going to have more species coming up into our upland pools, which perhaps we didn't see there before. So that represents competition for a whole host of resources. Habitat loss, so in simple terms, drainage of areas, but also a big player, I think, in upland areas is degradation of habitat. I'm thinking about the pools in the project area in particular. So many of them are so difficult to access and to bother going to that if they're not used for anything, or if they're not needed to be kept open and valuable as pools, then they're just left alone. And of course, battling succession again, as was talked about in the very first talk today, those ponds will fill in very quickly and no longer be valuable dragonfly habitat. So it's neglect probably is as much of a threat as many other things. I put this one in just because it amuses me trying to say it. Atmospheric deposition leading to acidification and eutrophication, all of which basically means an accumulation really of lots of substances in our atmosphere due to our activities, which are increasingly finding their way into water bodies and water courses. And on the one hand, making them more acidic, and on the other hand, sometimes acting almost as fertilizers and leading to eutrophication, which of course reduces the water quality. And again, thinking about upland habitats in particular, often burning is used as a tool for management of heather. And certainly carbon is also something that's creating problems, finding its way into waterways, apparently altering the water chemistry, and having an effect on the freshwater invertebrates that are able to successfully inhabit those spaces. And as if that wasn't a bad enough list, I've just generally put other pollutants. And a good example, or I should say a very bad example, would be neonicotinoids, which I'm sure, again, we've all heard of. But I'm thinking particularly in the project area we have, especially on the Longmin Plateau, a huge number of visitors, which means a huge number of dogs, the majority of which are probably treated with these spot-on flea treatments, which are, of course, these neonicotinoid insecticides. And I don't know that any research has been done on the pools in the Mind itself, but certainly elsewhere we know there are increasing levels of these neonics being found in watercourses. And of course, that is not good news for freshwater invertebrates living there. So a whole host of challenges, which is a great shame, really, because, we're talking about wonderful species like this, just a momentary bit of light relief on the slides of these lovely photos, again from Andrew Fusek Peters, of black darter with early morning dew on the wings. We're talking about the wonderful, extremely long golden ring dragonfly in its fast-flowing streams. Mentioned the emerald damselfly, and of course the fabulous common hawker that never seems to stay still. And a wonderful shot there by Stephen Barlow of dragonfly coming straight at you. So they're fabulous insects, and obviously moving forward, it's well, we all know it's quite difficult to stay positive about the things we can actually do. And when we're talking about climate change, we're all well aware to have any impact on the course of this, is going to require massive changes at a global level. But at a local level, when we're talking about habitat that's available, so the quantity of the habitat that we've got, the quality of the habitat that we've got, and the connectedness of the habitat that we actually have, we really can make big improvements. So the populations that we do have aren't so isolated, and they actually have improved resilience to climate change and these other problems going forward. So as much as it seems overwhelming, there really are things we can do to sort of reinforce, if you like, the position of some of these species and give them the best chance possible of hanging around and surviving the climatic changes that are coming. And it's in that spirit, really, that the action plan that we've got here has been written. So we know it's called upland dragonflies. It's not naming one specific species, but it's actually focusing on two. It's focusing on the black darter and the golden ring dragonfly. And the project chose these two really because they occupy two very different habitat types. So you've got your golden ring and your fast flowing highly oxygenated gravel bottomed streams, and you've got your black darter in your shallow acidic bog pools. And the hope really was that if we improve a broader range of habitat types, then obviously the more species will benefit. So the action plan is 4 pages long, but because, as I say, time's rattling on, it basically says we need to understand a lot more about what we've got and where it is, so the status and distribution of the species in the project area. And once we know this and know the good habitat we've got, this will better inform where we can make changes. So we can manage that habitat, create new habitat, restore what we've got, perhaps better link and connect those habitats. And a good section of the action plan also sets out what some of those practical actions that we ultimately do on the ground will be. So, as I say, that could be simple as creating new ponds that link the existing ponds. It could be actively managing ponds that have been neglected, so making sure there's a degree of open water, making sure they're deep enough so that they don't actually dry out far too soon. And this sort of mirrors perhaps some of the work that's been done with azure hawker up in Scotland. Also, re-wetting areas, so blocking drainage, renaturalising streams and watercourses, and careful management really of streamside banks, thinking of golden ring dragonfly, and the surrounding area around those streams as well. So perhaps limiting livestock in some of the areas to reduce the level of poaching, reducing impact of grazing, which apparently introduces a lot more silt into the water and obviously then reduces the quality of that. And making sure people are aware of and respecting buffer zones around the watercourses as well, certainly when it comes to any burning or spraying or all these sorts of things that go on. But before we get to, doing things on the ground, the first step is to find out more about what we've got. So the action plan details the records we know about. So this is the same project area Charlie showed you. And very simply, it shows these green dots are the black darter records we know about. But if you look at that screen, you can see there's an awful lot of blue areas, water bodies that we know about with very few records, probably because no one's actually been there for an age. So we're really encouraging people to sort of check out a lot more of these areas in and around the sort of plateau. So we have a far better idea of the quality of these habitats that we've actually got in the upland, in the elevated part of the project area. Rattling on, sorry, I'm aware of the time. Golden ring dragonfly, similar map for that. It's interesting when you look at this, of course, because many of the records, not only are they sitting around Cardingmill Valley, which is this very popular area, but they're also sitting on the sides as opposed to mostly on the top of the plateau, because of course the golden ringed are in these fast flowing streams coming whizzing off the top. But again, lots of areas around the perimeter where we don't have sightings, and areas that are certainly worth checking, and even out as far to the left here in this common area, which there have been a couple of sightings in the past. So just for the last minute or two, it really, as I say, this is very a crawl to people really who are local to Shropshire, but it does give ideas of what perhaps you can ask people to do in your own area. And as the statement there basically says, we need to find out more accurately what we've got and where our priority sites are. And the challenge as a species champion I was facing really was, well, how do you get lots of enthusiastic people and indeed landowners involved when the majority of people won't be able to identify their dragonflies? So I've decided, in order to get everyone out recording, to take a two-stranded approach. So looking at monitoring and investigating. So monitoring is for people with dragonfly identification experience, and investigating is for anyone and everyone, and hopefully picking up lots of landowners, as I say, in the area. So the monitoring, calling on the experienced eyes, really, the individuals or groups, and getting them to adopt, it's now Wildmoor Pool or the bog, because someone's already snaffled Pole Cottage pools, which is great news. But I want them to do decent monitoring, because we don't have any dragonfly regular monitoring going on in the project area, to my knowledge at all. So I want them to visit monthly. I don't think 3 visits is enough, really. I want them to go every month if we're going to do it well, from May to September inclusive, and sort of carry out proper standardized monitoring. So this can sort of set a baseline of what we've got, and it can go forward, hopefully, for many, many years to come, because it says on the slide, the value in monitoring is really in long-term monitoring. So it needs to be accurately set up. So even if the original people who carry out the work can't continue, it can be carried on in the same way by someone else. So people who are interested in that, I'm encouraging to get in touch, and certainly anyone on this call who's interested, please do get in touch. And then I discuss exactly what you're going to do at the site with yourselves and give you lots of useful helpful survey tips and forms and all the rest of it, and visit the site with you. So everything's good to go for this year. The other strand was investigating. So we've taken the whole project area, as you see on the right, and we split it into 1 kilometre squares, monads, and basically we're assigning people to these 1 kilometre squares. And you sign yourself up to it, even better if you own it, because you'll have access to all of it, and you check it 3 times in the flight season between May and September. And when you check it, you're looking for dragonfly activity and dragonfly habitats. You don't need to know what they are. It's fine if you do, and you can jot that down on the form that I give you. But you're essentially looking for mating pairs, signs of egg laying, finding any exuvii and these sorts of things, and also looking for perhaps pools that have become neglected and dried up, or terrestrialized, watercourses perhaps that have dried up. So really just having a scout about that whole area as much as you can access of it, to see what potential there is and to see if there's any decent habitat. And then of course that will be followed up by myself or other checkers with a more experienced eye to see what we've actually got there. But it's just really a way of getting to a broader area and enabling lots of people to help us with that, including, as I say, people who own the land. So obviously you need to only go to places within the kilometre square you can legally go and that you can practically and safely access. And you need to pick a monad that's appropriate for upland dragonflies. So there's no point in sort of coming to this corridor area down here and looking for black darter on the A49, which is a hideous road running through the edge here. So thinking really about searching out these sorts of areas in the sort of upper elevations of the project area is where we're really interested. So I'm sure I've gone over, I always go over time, but I sort of rushed through everything yesterday, and I've actually just got my local newsletter out, which has details on everything I've said and a lot more. And also on the Shropshire Dragonflies website, which you've got there. If you go on there and look under news and events, you'll see a whole page dedicated to this, and it links to everything you need to know, really, including the form you'll get sent if you want to check out and sign up to a monad. So you've got a real idea of what I'm asking you to do. But, you know, any questions, queries, please do get in touch with me via the contact form on that website. And that's it. That's all I've got time for. Thank you for listening.